This is a beginning pattern making sleeve theory review. So on this little drawing of a person, when you're making a sleeve, you want to measure the length of the arm from the shoulder, where it changes direction, where you feel that little bend in your arm when you're moving your arm. So from the top to the wrist, often with the wrist bent. But you'll take that number and draw a straight line down what will become the middle of the sleeve. And then if you put the measuring tape right up into the armpit so it's touching, and then measure from that same point at the top down to the bottom of the measuring tape, that gives you an extra 1/2 inch of ease, and you have your cap height. So that's where I would measure from there down to where that circumference was taken and draw a perpendicular line right there. So you've got a straight line and a line that comes across it. You'd want to center that. And then for the wrist, you take your wrist circumference, maybe you want to add a finger width, and then draw that line 1/2 on each side, centered over this common line from the sleeve length. So bicep circumference, hem circumference, cap height, and total length. In the book, when it tells you what to do, it will have you add a certain amount here and subtract a certain amount there and come back in. And that can be a decent way to start a sleeve. This is really just going to be your best guess. But you want to create a line that starts off of this one that's perpendicular. So I'm going to do that on both sides, except not that line, this line. So when you've got your plastic ruler, you'll draw the lines, and then you'll come up to the end of this one and put your plastic ruler over it and put a little right angle at the top on both sides. And then, based on the way the book shows you how to do it, you would use your curve and start at the top and hit that line and this one, and you would come back down into there and then bring this one and join that right angle line. And that's a really good place to start. That's why they've done that in the book. Sometimes I find that to be a little clunky. So instead of that approach, you can start that way, but after you've gotten that far, I like to take my piece, and if this is my front, so this would be the front side, this is going to be the back side, I will actually line the piece up right there on the corner, and then I'll rotate my piece around a little bit. That's actually quite similar to where we've got this, but I'm going to rotate this around until we've got a right angle right there. So I want to keep my sleeve still, and I'm just going to set down my front piece with the corners lined up where that little right angle lines up with it, and I'll set it down there. And then I'm going to trace that line onto the paper up to about here. So if I'm doing that on the computer, I'm just going to copy that line and attach it to my sleeve. And then I'll do the same thing with my back, because this way I get a nice line that lines up exactly with my armhole pattern. So I'm going to do that again, line that up exactly. So that's actually kind of close to what I got. It isn't always close to what you get though. And I don't have select reference location to start with, so that's giving me a little bit of trouble here. This. It would have been easier if I had had that selected. Okay, so I'm going to copy that line just like I did the other one. Create line copy. Or if I were, when you're working with paper, you just trace the first part of it onto the paper. And I want it on the sleeve, and then cancel. Okay. So I'm going to delete some of the lines that I put in at first. Not that one though. So the ones you really need are the right angle, the shape of the curve of the sleeve that already exists from the body. And those are good guidelines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want that to be a little taller, so I'm going to pull that line out further. So my center line that I've drawn, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So at the top of this, I also want a right angle. And I think I'm going to start that right here. I'm just adding a little bit of extra ease to it. I may wish that I had it lower, but perpendicular both directions. So I've got my line, my right angle, the curve is coming up, and then I want to curve it back around to the top of this line. And because I used the curve of my sleeve, the shape of my sleeves are different. It's different from one side to the other, and the back even has the matching notches already. So then you want to use your curve or your 2-point line. I don't want it to be a right angle for very long, but I'm just going to blend those so that they look nice together. And this is really just our first best guess, so after I've done this, I'm going to cut it out and sew together a test one and alter it, because that's what ends up happening when you do it the other way. So if I measure this and I get 6 inches, if I go to the bottom of the tape which gives you an extra 1/2 inch of ease. Then I'll add another 1/2 inch. But that's difficult to measure, which is why it often changes. So I want to keep that line until it touches this one, and I want to keep this one until it touches this one. I also want to keep that one until it touches this one. And this one until it touches that one. So that one apparently isn't touching. So with that information, I'm going to change this. Oh, I didn't copy that center line, but I will get it. Okay, so this is the one that I would cut out a test sample, and then I would sew the underarm seam together, and then I would sew the armpit seam into the bottom of the armpit, and then I would pin the top part in on the person so that I get it exactly to their shape, and then I would mark that in pen on here, and then I would redigitize that or change it based on the fabric and where I pinned it. When I try to think and talk at the same time, it takes a lot longer than I feel like you need to go through. So I've added the lines back to the sleeve. I've tipped it up so that it's more in the direction that we're used to looking. And I've drawn 2 lines where if I were to fold this line over to the center and this line over to the center and crease it, this point to here, that point to there, so it's folded, then I would get the sleeve folded over on itself, and you'd be able to see the opening of the sleeve, and this part would be the under part of the sleeve. So you could pick up the under part of the sleeve and lay it down where it lines up with the front and back of the body. And as that sews in, it makes a nice shape and comes up. And the bottom part of the sleeve fits down to here, which is why I would sew that into the armpit. Oh, well, that needs to be flipped over. Modify piece flip. And I didn't give myself a middle line. So this would actually match the back better now. So it would sew into the back and the front, and then the top half would need to sew in too. So this is a fold line and this is a fold line, and it's folded together. You can see the whole sleeve all at once. We're pretending. And this would end up sewing into the top of the sleeve, and I need to flip that too. So this little sleeve that I've made is too big for the armhole, but it was so you could see how I made it. And that's how it lines up. So eventually we would walk it all the way around and make sure that the sleeve matches. But that's the concept. When this folds together, it creates the armhole. And when these are together, wrapped over on top of each other, you've got the one armhole sewing into the other armhole. And usually I draw this on the chalkboard, and I don't know that I do a better job on the chalkboard. Okay, so I'm going to use a real sleeve that was made that way and show you how to finish it. So you've made your sleeve. I could be doing the same thing on paper, and I want to lay my front and back bodice together and pin or tape the shoulder together so that it holds still, and then I want to pick up my sleeve and walk it around right here. So I'm going to do the computer equivalent of that. The pieces that aren't moving are these two, and this one going the other direction is going to walk across the top. So as I'm checking this, the shapes match, and apparently that's not the sleeve that I copied. The other one would match exactly. So as you come along right here, you would want to stop and transfer the notches from the sleeve or the bodice back to the other one so that they match identically. And then I'm going to come around to where it touches and it lines up and we run out of shoulder space. So mark your notches exactly here, and then when you get to the top of the sleeve, I'm going to add a notch to the sleeve that lines up exactly on this same piece. So I want my sleeve notch. This isn't going to be the notch we end up with, but I want to put a notch right there so I can, and it doesn't look to me like I got that. So there we go. That's exactly where the shoulder line matches up. And you want to be precise. Oh, apparently I put two notches there. Alright, now I'm going to do the same thing from the other side. And sleeves usually have E's in them, so the sleeve is going to be bigger than the armhole. And in beginning pattern making, you've got a basic sleeve that came with your pieces. So you're just going to be walking that around to see how well it matches. Oh. So this time I'm going to start from the other side. And I'm just going to go ahead and stop. So the piece that's moving is this one, and I want it to go the other direction. Okay. So walk that around while the piece is right here. Trace your notch from the body to the sleeve, or vice versa. If there's no notch there, go ahead and make one about the point where it changes direction, anywhere between where that point is and where the actual notch is. And then I'm going to stop that right there where it touches here too. So where I run out of sleeves, where I run out of front armhole space, I'm going to add another notch to the sleeve that I can't touch. Okay. So this part you want to do to your pattern pieces. So that means that this matches this in length exactly, and this matches that exactly, and the notches should match exactly. And then we've got an extra amount right here that will be gathers. So when you're working on a sleeve, you don't ever want the sleeve cap to be the identical same size as the sleeve armhole. So in full scale, if you've got your armhole and it's 16 inches, then your sleeve would need to be 17. So if you're working half scale and the measurement that you've got is 8 inches, then the measurement across the top of your cap would need to be a minimum of 8.5. So when you're sewing in a sleeve, between these notches and this notch, you're going to ease the larger sleeve into the armhole and line it up on a notch here that's centered. So one thing that I want to do now is measure between these two notches. And I don't want the center of the sleeve to end up there. I want the center of the extra space to end up there. And if you're using paper, you can just easily do this. But since I'm on the computer, I have to split the line to measure it. So you want to measure between those two notches that you've added. And I got 2.613, so that's 2 5/8. So for full scale, that means I've got 1 5/8 more than I need. And half scale, you would be looking at only wanting an extra 1/2 inch. So if you've got more than 1/2 inch there, the next thing I'm going to do is show you how to remove that. But before I do, between those two notches, if you're going to go ahead and use the sleeve exactly the way it is, we don't want that original notch that we've got there, that it's not quite on center on purpose, but you want the notch to be centered between the other two notches. So I'm going to create a notch this time, and I'm going to find halfway between on that line and put a notch. And if you measure whatever the total is and divide it in half, then that's where your center notch belongs, and you could be finished. If you've got more than 5/8 or less than 3/8, you need to make an adjustment half scale. Full scale, if you've got more than 5/8 on each side, you might need to make an adjustment unless you don't mind that there are gathers on the sleeve as it goes into the armhole. So I'm going to save that one. I'm just going to keep it simple. If you've got too much or too little All you need to do is cut it down the center line. And then spread it open if you need to add more, or overlap it if you need it to be smaller. And once you've done that, you've still got your original space from your notch on each side. And I want to make sure it's balanced. And I don't need this notch that was here in the middle anymore. I want to have the measurement between those two notches where I measured the opening of the armhole, and this is the back armhole, and this is the front armhole. So I've got those lengths measured on there. And I'm going to go ahead and delete the notch. And if it turns out a little weird shape, then just use your curve and blend a nice line across where you want it to be. So now you've fixed your line. My two notches disappeared, but they're still marked where they were. So instead of leaving those two notches, you're going to divide that space in half and put a notch right in the middle of your leftover space. And then delete the other two notches. And then that sleeve should sew into the armhole nicely with ease, a little bit on each side, and it's balanced because the extra space is divided in half. Okay, I'm going to set that one aside and go through the basics of adding and subtracting fullness. So we're going to say that this one fits your armhole. Usually the sleeve that I pass out fits pretty well, within 1/4 of an inch. So if I want to slash and spread and add gathers to the top, then you're just going to cut lines through it like I'm going to do. So you'd measure and kind of make it even. The book probably gives a specific measurement, but you just want to divide it into even sections. And I am actually going to be adding fullness at the bottom, so we'll have a sleeve that has a puff at the bottom, or it will be like an angel sleeve. That's not what we call them. So you just measure and evenly space them. So I'm going to switch to value on mine so I can add a 1/2 inch between each of those sections. You can add more or less, and you just reposition the paper so that you've got added fullness, extra flare. You could add a lot more than that if you wanted to. Okay, so that's fullness added at the hem. You'd want to fold it in half between those two lines and then reestablish your grain line. So if I were folding it imaginary, well, just fold it. Leave your notch in the same place. When we add it the other direction, you'll need to fold it again. Okay, so if I want to add fullness at the top, slash it very similarly. And this time I'm going to add an inch just for fun. And you just spread your paper open. I didn't add an inch here, and I could have. In the book, it will show you that you need to add to the cap height. So I would just continue. Use your curve and continue from here to about a half an inch above the top of your sleeve. So measure up a half an inch and put a mark there, and then just join with that edge. So you're just going to redraw your curve. And if you've added the same amount on both sides, your notch can stay roughly in the same place. But that's with 4 inches added. So we've got one with fullness added at the bottom, fullness added at the top, and I can do the same thing and add it in both. So I'm going to add an inch at the bottom and a half an inch at the top, all the way along. But you can choose whatever number you want. So that added it at the top and the bottom. And I need to fix my grain line by folding it from corner to corner. So that's folding this corner to this corner, and then you'll mark the center of that line, and that will be the grain. And use your curve and do the same thing. Just continue that at the top. And flip your curve over and do the opposite. So just to clarify, if this is my shoulder, then this sleeve because it has a little bit of ease, poofs a little bit right here at the top, and the bottom of the sleeve flares out a little bit, like that. And if I had added more, it would flare out even more. And this one has a lot of poof, but the hem is still kind of the same size. And this one has a lot of poof at the top, and maybe if you wanted it to stay the same size so that it was puffy, like that, then you would add a band around the bottom. And I could take any of these and turn it into a petal sleeve, P-E-T-A-L. You can see that one in your book. But if I were going to turn it into a petal sleeve, I would draw where I wanted my new lines to be and kind of cross them over each other like that. And then I'd have to trace off the two pieces, so I sew them back together so it would look like this. So that would be one side. And then the other side. And I have that center notch to line them up. And you'd put them together right there and gather it across the top and sew the side seams, and then it sews into the body. So that would be a petal sleeve. And you can do long ones or short ones. Well, we probably need to do one more. So the one that has a cuff on it, if I wanted my cuff to be 1 inch tall, and I wanted the top to be here, and I'm coming down another inch, so I'll measure down 1 inch for that. Then this side folds up under there, and then it comes back down. And I'm trying to figure out how to explain this on the computer, because you would actually fold your paper here so that it came up and then fold it back down. So you would be having 3 layers, the under layer, the layer that folds up, and the layer that folds back down, and you can ignore that last line that I drew. So to do that, I'm going to have to do it a little bit differently. Because all you have to do is fold the paper and cut it right here, and then open it back up, and you'll have what I'm about to do. So I've got 3 lines roughly an inch apart, so they would fold back up to here, and that one isn't an inch. There we go. Okay. So by folding it along those lines and lining it up where you want it to be and cutting it, if you folded those lines starting with the bottom of the sleeve and then the next line and the next line and fold them up so that they're all laying on top of each other to this line, then you cut it off while it's folded, it ends up looking like this, and then you've automatically got your cuff on the end.